I stand for truth over lies. I categorically reject white supremacy, and I believe a presidency should be transparent. This isn't what you expect of a head coach of an NBA team, but this is Steve Kerr. Now, you might remember after the horrific events of the Robb elementary school shooting, in which 19 children and 2 teachers were murdered by a gunman wielding semi-automatic weapons. Kerr got all emotional, reiterating his points about gun control and so forth, and that was during a press conference for Game 4 of the NBA's 2022 Western Conference Finals. Now, Kerr is the head coach of the winners of the Golden State Warriors, the winners of the NBA championships just last night. So there's a lot going on with this team. They're a bit of a rags to riches story with a very, very popular head coach. And I'm joined now by the Irish Examiner's Kieran Shannon just to talk about the significance of what I believe is their 4th title in 8 years. How are you, Kieran?
Good, Johnny. Good.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, you started with Kerr, and what an exceptional person he is. You know, he's outspoken on such matters like social justice. Like, the Warriors were actually one of the first teams to refuse to go to the White House in light of who was occupying it when Trump came along. It was at a time when, if you remember, there was a controversy of sorts. Rory McIlroy and Shane Lowry and Padraig Harrington gave an interview to the what happened was that Shane Lowry and Padraig Harrington had given an interview in January 17 to Paul Kimmage, and at the time Rory, within Trump's first month, had gone golfing. And I remember making the point at the time that the lads would have been off the old school of, you know, we're just athletes, so like in a way, in other words, nearly just shut up and swing the golf ball.
Sounds very, very topical at the moment.
Yeah, well, what you then had was, I remember the point I was making, and look, McIlroy himself, has reversed his position then, is that America was changing, even in obviously the final few years of Obama, particularly in wake of what was happening to the black community and the policing and the rise of the Black Lives Matters movement meant there was the re-emergence of the socially active and the socially aware athlete at the SP Awards that summer. Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade spoke and said, we're not going to be quite like maybe the previous generation, the Michael Kobe generation had been. And I remember very early in that, upon Trump's appointment and when the immigration ban came in straight away, the Muslim ban essentially, he talked about, yes, I think one of the, he was an Under Armour client. He's on their books, obviously, Curry, and their owner had said that Trump was a potential asset, and Curry came up with the quip, well, if you remove the last 2 letters there, that's what he is. And right away, so look, Kerr has been hugely outspoken, and rightly so, on the gun control issue throughout. Obviously, he has personal experience in a different setting when his father was shot in the Lebanon when he was lecturing there, and Kerr at the time was a student with Arizona, so he had that personal experience. But you know, he would have played under Greg Popovich with the San Antonio Spurs. And Popovich, even though he plays and coaches a Texas franchise in the San Antonio Spurs, would speak his mind, and I suppose would be considered to be on, let's say, the left side of the spectrum in US politics. But so Kerr, like when they were going into Game 4 against Dallas, made those comments because he and several of his players aren't off the just shut up and dribble variety, and in a way that makes for some of us that might make them all the more popular champions. But like, going back to him being an exceptional person, what this has shown is that he's an exceptional coach, even though he's only been 8 years as a head coach in the NBA. Those 8 years have been with the Warriors. He's got them to the final 6 times. this is their fourth time winning it, and it is the sweetest. In several of their comments, they said this is the sweetest because they weren't supposed to get back here. They were looking like an absolute dynasty. Look, they were to get to 5 straight finals. It hadn't been done in a long, long time. I think you have to go back to the Lakers in the 80s for something like it. Jordan obviously had a hiatus, so the Bulls didn't even pull it off. But they had got to 5 finals, but in light of the injuries they sustained, Durant and Thompson went down against Toronto in those finals. And obviously Durant then left in that free agency summer. And then when Curry himself sustained an injury at the start of the subsequent season, it seemed like all of a sudden they were gone as a dynasty. And as contenders, they actually finished that subsequent 2019-2020 season as the last place team in the league. And although they got the number 2 draft pick in Wiseman as a result of that underperformance, it wasn't like Wiseman has also been injury plagued and did not feature this season. So for them to come back and for Curry to play the way he did, it's easily the sweetest of any of the 4 they've won before, or that they've won overall.
Just reading The Guardian today, the new Golden State Warriors, relentless, ruthless and oddly endearing. The Warriors' pandemic-era decline and the uncertainty that once surrounded their bigger stars are enough to make this title a genuine feel-good story. And I guess there are a couple of stories about like some of their players. Obviously, Steph Curry has become obviously one of the great NBA players, but some other players as well, almost like rags to riches stories within the roster.
Well, rags to riches, there are some. Like there's a guy called Gary Payton II, or is it Gary Payton the Jr.? His father would be Gary Payton, who was won a championship with Miami, but would be best known for playing with the Seattle Supersonics and be one of the greatest defenders ever. But Gary Payton II or Jr., because Gary apparently has had 2 sons who were born within a year of each other to 2 different mothers, and one was called Junior and one was called Gary Payton II. So Gary Payton with the current Warriors, and you could see his father was delighted for him yesterday. Like he'd been on 5 G League teams and 4 NBA teams. He had applied to be a video assistant within the setup. He was expecting to be cut, but he was kept on for this year and ended up being a key player, particularly in Game 5, where Curry was having his one poor game in the series and Payton shot 6 for 8. Came up huge for them. So he's such a player. Andrew Wiggins, I don't know if you could call him rags to riches. Because
yeah, tell us about him, because he's like, I'm sure you, Kieran, and everyone listening can tell of your man who, it's like the story of where the 2 lads are on the sideline at the GA game and this fella comes on, he's looking a bit dishevelled, and one lad turns to the other and kind of wistfully says, he was a great miner. Because this fella had a great career that he lost, had a great future behind him, but then it was actually ahead of him. Yeah,
exactly. Like what happened was he was the number 1 draft pick to Minnesota Timberwolves. He was with Cleveland, but he was part of the trade when LeBron went back to Cleveland. So the Cavs traded him to the Timberwolves to get Kevin Love because LeBron obviously. And Wiggins at the time seemed, as you said, so he was seen as having this great potential. He was drafted number 1, but underachieved and was yet overpaid, you could say, in Minnesota, and no one was willing to take on that contract. But the Warriors felt, wait a second, he doesn't. The problem in Minnesota is he has to be considered one of their 1 or 2 best players. He doesn't have to be that with us. He just needs to be the 3rd or 4th best player, and that's probably why they've won, because nobody had a 3rd best player like him. And he was outstanding in these finals in particular. Again, when Curry was struggling in Game 5, it was Wiggins who just cut to the basket, and also the defensive end. Jason Tatum has had a good playoffs but did not have a good finals, and a part of that was because of the lockdown defense Wiggins was playing on him. Athletically, he could match him. So it's been a huge vindication for him, but also for the Warriors by willing to take on his contract. And again, a measure of just how smart an operation and franchise this is.
I guess we like a story like that where somebody seem to have that, seems to have been almost written off. And I'm sure Wiggins wasn't exactly doing badly in life, but when you see somebody belatedly reach potential, there's a feel-good story there.
Yeah, that's part of it, but I think actually the most feel-good factor is for Curry himself, because he's the face of the franchise. But he would have been, look, part of the debate in America more than in other places, I would say here, or particularly in basketball, what you have is, where is your legacy? Where are you in the pantheon? I mean, you don't get a day without, on their talk shows over there, where they're discussing the pantheon. Where is LeBron in relation to Jordan, Kobe, etc.? And with Curry, there has been this, just where is he even in this generation? And what would have often been held against him was that, you see, like, he did win a 2015 finals in Kerr's first year as coach. They beat LeBron, but LeBron would have been seen to be under-supported, with Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving being injured for those finals. So there was always that asterisk. And then when the Warriors beat the Cavs again in 17 and 18, it would have been, well, you had Kevin Durant, and the competition would have been seen to be unfair. It wasn't proper competition, because they were just seen to be so loaded, and Durant was seen as the number one, and statistically he was. There would have always been an argument that because of the attention that Curry draws, because he's such a threat from three-point range, that it freed up Durant. And historically, so it was always held up against Curry, but he was never the finals MVP. But this year he averaged 31.2 over the 6 games, was undoubtedly the finals MVP, and now there can be no doubt in his greatness. And again, on top of that, along with the lull they had over the last 2 years, they didn't make the playoffs last year, even though Curry had a very good year. Without Thompson, they were lacking. He needed a Thompson to get back there, but even though Thompson's only 75% of the player he was 3 years ago before the injury. So I think it's Curry that people are most delighted for, because there is no doubt now he's, whatever you want to say, top 12, top 13, and it now adds greater stature to the 3 previous he had, because maybe there's an appreciation, this guy is an exceptional player. So and it showed in all facets of, obviously his shooting was still, like, he had a poor shooting night in game 5. He didn't score a 3-pointer for the first time in something like 234 games. But last night he knocked down 5 or 6 threes out of 10 shots, and yet can slash to the basket because it opens up with them all drawing the attention, and he moved the ball, he got rebounds, and he's just shown. And defensively, like, the thing about Curry, he's so relatable, because by basketball standards he's quite small. I mean, not everybody can be a LeBron or Kevin Durant, because we're not 6'9" or 7 foot.
He's 6'2", yeah.
He's 6'2", but he's the most relatable superstar the sport has probably ever known. Like, my own young fellow would be quite small even for his own age, but like, he idolizes Curry because he's that scrawny kid, small kid on the playground, and yet he has and what you have had is this. He has changed the game, like, because of the popularity of the 3-point and well beyond. I mean, Curry is shooting shots from anytime he steps over half court. He's a threat. You know, last night he scored one that was at least 6 foot outside the arc. So he's that relatable. But the other thing he is a killer. Like, he has committed himself so much to his strength and conditioning. There was an article on ESPN there last week which showed the work he has put into his strength, and that's why he's been so durable. He is 34 now, and defensively he was exceptional. Actually, he has improved defensively. He won't be a lockdown. He won't ever make an all-NBA defense, but he's certainly not the liability that he maybe would have been portrayed as in previous years. And so I think people are delighted for Curry, because again, as he shouted it out in the celebrations. You know, what can they say now? What can they say? Because you can never say now, oh, he had a Durant to win those championships. Oh, the other team were down their key men. Oh, he didn't win Finals MVP. There is no doubt now about his greatness, or indeed the Warriors.
And it's just, you see Troy Parrott coming off the pitch the other night and kind of blessing himself a couple of times, and it's almost like unusual now to see a player doing that in Ireland. But he's big into his faith as well. And just in terms of his age, how much of an outlier is that at that age to be that good in basketball?
No, it would be for a guard. It can be a bit more challenging. I mean, it can be more challenging. We've had great point guards like Isaiah Thomas go into decline because of a serious injury, but the wear and tear. But look, in Curry, there's probably another 2 or 3 really good years. I mean, he just signed at the start of the season a 4 or 5 year contract that brings him up to 201 million. I think he's the first 2 player to sign 200 plus million. He was initially earlier in his career because he had such injury. I suppose what you have to factor in, he had a lot of injuries early in his career, Johnny. So that, like, nobody thought Curry was going to be this. Even when he was drafted low, around 7th, even in his early years, people didn't see that he was going to become this. So considering his injury history earlier in his career, for him to have had the longevity and success he had, it's outstanding. But you can see him now, because of the work he's put into his body. You can see now the Warriors again being a threat for the next 3 years easily. You know, that he could get a 5 and elevate himself beyond some of the greats like LeBron, who are on 4.
And where do the Warriors fit now in terms of the all-time great NBA teams?
Yeah, like, I mean, as I said, they've got into 6 finals in 8 years, which is a run that's comparable with anybody of the last 30 years post Lakers of Magic Johnson. They've modeled themselves, like, will they get a run? Because of the injuries they had in 2019, there was a chance there, and if Durant had stayed, you could be talking about 5, 6 in a row. That didn't happen. But they have built themselves. They've spoken about how they see themselves more, less the Chicago Bulls that Kerr was on, the second three-peat with Jordan. They see themselves more like the San Antonio Spurs, who won 5 championships over and made the playoffs for 18 years under, let's say, the Tim Duncan. So they want to be consistently competitive. While they didn't play Wiseman and Moody and Kuminga, 3 of their recent lottery draft picks in recent years, they believe they are the future. That's why they didn't chip in some of those to get maybe a top star, because they want to have that Curry is still playing with players who are of that profile of being 23, 24, 25. I mean, you've seen the mistake the Lakers have made with going with a whole lot of veterans who just can't get around the floor anymore defensively. Like, on paper, the Lakers were obviously, you know, they had Westbrook and they had Davis, but the support, they had their own issues, Davis and Westbrook, but then the supporting cast were just veterans, whereas the Warriors want to surround Curry over the next few years with the likes of, they believe Kuminga will still be something special, Wiseman will be back next year, young guns hungry for it. And that hunger was a factor, even though Boston are a team on the rise, albeit they'll find it very hard to get back because, you know, the Bucks, who won it last year, will have Middleton back, you would think, next year. Other teams are going to reload. But Boston are a dangerous team. But they had a profile, though, of, you would think, the eye of the tiger. But because of, as you mentioned, the likes of Wiggins and Payton, along with the likes of Curry and Draymond Green and Thompson, who were so mad to get back what they once possibly took for granted. As they said afterwards, you know, you don't win these things just, you know, they showed why, you know, we being here before was a big thing, but it's all the sweeter for them, and they were all the more desperate because they didn't know whether they'd get back.
I got to ask you, who do you believe is the bookies' favourite to be the next US president?
I presume it's Trump.
It's Trump, right? So the Democrats are clearly, they're fractured. Biden might be too old. Kamala Harris isn't that popular. They need Steve Kerr to run for the Democrats, no?
Well, I tell you, the values that man stands for would be something you would want in any president. There would be I think Kerr would be happy to, maybe if Greg Popovich took that on, his mentor, as I mentioned, and would be off the age profile and maybe finishing up, I think. But someone, I put it to you this way, Popovich for president with an endorsement from Kerr, and yeah, maybe the Warriors would show up at the White House. Yeah, because look, Kerr is, as you said there, Johnny, like he is exceptional for being just speaking his mind, and those values. Well, they might be, not in potentially in the White House going forward, or certainly not from 2016 to 2020. Like, they shine through in his team, and like I think he's shown himself to be an outstanding leader, and I think the Warriors have responded to that.
You heard it here first. Thanks, Kieran.
All right, Johnny. So, man, thanks.